Paul Severino from MLB Network, studio host. You can watch Paul on The Rundown coming up today at 2. Plus, you got MLB Network, which will feature the Rockies at the Giants at 3:30, the Rangers and the Indians tonight at 7 p.m. And Paul's kind enough to join us for a couple of minutes. How you been, Paul?
I'm good. Yourself? Good to be with you.
I'm doing well, and I appreciate it. All right, let's start with the aforementioned the Rockies who take on the Giants later today on your network, MLB Network. I thought going into the season, certainly they would be a better team. I know they dropped the first 2 of 3 against the Giants last night, a tough loss in extras. But I look around on this losing streak that's reached 7 games. I mean, how about the cause for concern if you are a Colorado fan? I mean, they're still right in it in the NL West, but the last week or two, their pitching has been shelled, and now they learn that they're going to lose Anderson for the next 4 weeks.
Yeah, but they're getting Gray back, and obviously Gray doesn't necessarily have the Clayton Kershaw type resume and 10 years worth of back of the baseball card, but I think that I'm with you. I was doing a show on an intentional talk show in the middle of the off season, and we decided to do bold predictions. And I looked around, and I'm just thinking, what could I possibly think of? And I'm thinking, all right, how about the Rockies competing for the wild card? Yeah. And so I kind of hung on to that, and I brought it up in a few different shows and looked around, and it seemed like since they made the postseason last, this 10-year stretch, they always have a rough patch, and some are worse than others and longer than others and more devastating than others. But they've leaned so heavily on these rookies, these rookie pitchers that they've got, and they've done so well too. I mean, they've been terrific. What they've gotten out of Senzatella and Freeland and Hoffman, Marquez. It's been great. So, it doesn't surprise me that at any point in time, whether it's June or July or August or September, that these guys were going to hit a little bit of a rough patch. But they're still, to me, they're still a good team. I know the bullpen's been really great. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find another closer who got off to a better start than Greg Holland. They've got some other arms that have been, pretty good in the back of their bullpen, too. So I'm hoping that they break out of it, if for nothing else, because I said that they would, be in the mix. So for my own projection and my own prognostication, I'd be rooting for the Rockies. But, I think that is it's a fun division, and I think that they certainly have their work cut out for them. And I think that hopefully they'll turn it around.
Yeah, and you look at their offense as well. You got 2 or 3 potential players that'll probably smack 20, 25 home runs. And then you turn around, you also got to look at what the Dodgers are doing, right? Quietly, hey, they won 16 out of 18. They're red hot as well. Let me get to the NL East for a minute, and I just kind of want to skip over the Phillies because we kind of knew going in it was going to be a very long and tedious season with them. But when you look at the Mets, I thought the Mets, any chance of getting back in the NL East race, you got to go on a little run here. And I know they had the 3-game winning streak snap last night, but when you have teams like the Marlins and the Phillies, you got to try to sweep them. Now, last night, you lose another pitcher, Gazelman. It's ridiculous. I can't recall a season, and even Darling called him out on the broadcast. I can't recall a season where you've had one club, one team, lose as many pitchers, whether it's Syndergaard or Harvey or Wheeler or Lugo or Matz. It just 15 players on the DL. Is that just bad luck? Is it how some of these guys are being conditioned? Is it too much of the weight train? I mean, it just shocks me how many players, especially pitchers, this team has lost.
Well, I think by medical standards, I would be considered overweight. I think I'm like a skinny fat, so I don't know if I'm the perfect guy to kind of get into to all the training regimens. I try to throw a kettlebell around once a week and not
without throwing
myself.
Your back out, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's always my lower back. I think it stems from my hips, and I have some weak shoulders. But that's enough about me. But no, I mean, I think it's certainly interesting, and it's certainly alarming because it's not just this year. I mean, that they've had some crucial injuries in the past to this team, and again, I'm not close enough to know exactly what each and every pitcher's training regimen is or recovery protocol is on their, for pitchers, for example, their throw days or their in between game preparation. Personally, I don't know it. Probably sounds like a cop out. I apologize for that, but I don't know it, and so I'd be talking out of school if I went here and just destroyed the training staff because I don't know. But what you do know is exactly what you just said, and that's that a number of these guys have been hurt. And sometimes it's, for example, and this is the public knowledge of the whole thing, was the Syndergaard scenario when he, refused to get the MRI or the test, and then he goes out there and he tries to battle through it, and he hurts something else. And whether or not one thing was linked to the other, who knows? But that's kind of where you would hope and think that a training staff or an organization would step up and say, listen, you're a big part of this team, and whether you want to get the MRI or not, you're going to get it. And because what's better, missing a start or 10 days on the DL or missing 4 months?
Yeah.
That's what you kind of have to weigh. And it's something that we've talked about on MLB Tonight a number of times, and it stemmed from a Noah Syndergaard start, and it's not necessarily just Noah Syndergaard. It's kind of across baseball, and I called the Cubs-Nats game with John Smoltz, and we talked about it on Monday night. It's kind of it's baseball these days, and whether it's good or bad, it's baseball. And there was one start for Syndergaard a couple of months back, and I'm doing MLB Tonight. We're watching it. It's the first inning, 100 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour. And the conversation I had with John Smoltz on Monday was, and I've had it with him a lot, is you can't get a guy out in the first inning the same way that you would get a guy out with 2 on and 2 out in the 6th inning of a 1-run game. You got to leave yourself an avenue. And, John Smoltz had a great slider, for example. He's not throwing his best slider in the first inning with nobody on and 1 out. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to go whole hog in the first inning throwing 100 miles an hour or throwing your hardest. And again, it's not just Syndergaard. It's across baseball. Guys are not – and maybe it's just the way that it is, but I know I have a tough time watching. I get sick and tired of hearing, he had 5 solid innings tonight.
Right.
And he struck out 12, but he threw 115 pitches.
It's ridiculous.
And then the bullpen comes in, and then you got to get 4 innings out of your bullpen.
Which is taxing.
Exactly, and not many bullpens are built that way to get 12 outs a night. Not every team is, and even the Yankees last night, but just in general, they've got some good arms. Clippard's been iffy, but Clippard, Betances, and Chapman, you got guys that can get 9 outs a night, but you don't. Now you're getting 12 outs sometimes, and that's where things get difficult. So, how we treat our pitchers on a day-to-day basis is, I think it's one of those things where it's got to be reevaluated. But again, velocity sells, and we talk a lot about strikeouts and the velocity, and then contact leads to all the home runs too that we were talking about before. So it's a tangled web for sure.
Yeah, and I forgot what word you just used to describe Clifford. I think you said iffy. I think that's kind of being generous. Yeah, beyond. That's a horrible law. Let me ask you, Paul Severino joining us for a couple of moments, MLB Network studio host. You can catch him today on the Rundown coming up at 2. Plus, MLB Network's going to feature the Rockies and the Giants at 3:30. Rangers and the Indians tonight. That should be a good one as well, 7 p.m. You mentioned the Yankees, and we always talk about the sustainability, and they're going through some injuries. It's funny. You look at Didi Gregorius, and just quietly goes about his business, right? You would think those types of shoes to fill with Jeter, and not even the last several years with Jeter when he was still having those big hits, but just overall, it's just he hasn't even missed a beat. I think that's a credit to him. I wanted to get your thoughts on that, but I'm also curious, how about the sustainability with the Yankees in the AL East? Because you knew no matter what, Toronto, even though they had that horrible start, once they started to get around 500 baseball, they were going to be right back in it. Baltimore's Baltimore, and I really can't trust the Red Sox.
I'll start with Didi Gregorius, and I'll say this, and I thought the same thing when Rivera retired, and whoever it was going to be, and it happened to be David Robertson. The shoes are so big to fill that you almost have to train yourself to say, listen, I'm not going to be Mariano Rivera. I'm not going to be Derek Jeter. And it's not a very good player for that you're filling in for. It's an all-time great player. So And if the fan base knows, and the organization certainly does too, that Didi or Robertson or whoever it might be filling in for that all-time great, taking over rather for that all-time great, is not going to be that guy, and the sooner that player realizes that and just plays to the best of his ability, the better it is. And that's kind of what happened with Didi Gregorius. It took him a little bit of time, but he settled in nicely because he's a good player in his own right, and he's a different type of player. Jeter's got gold gloves on the mantle, but he was, all the metrics, none of them ever said he was a great defender. Didi Gregorius is a great defender, and he's got terrific power too, and he's a good hitter as well. He's a good all-around player. So you put all those things together, and if he just plays his best, it's still pretty darn good. Is it Derek Jeter? That's one guy's 20 years in the league, one guy's 5. It's hard to exactly, project 15 years from now. I guess we'll see. But so I think that Didi, you're absolutely right, goes about his business in such a way, and is a young, emotional leader of that club, and he likes to have a good time, and he's kind of part of that whole new young core that they've got, which gets me to the next point of the sustainability of this team. And they've gone through a lot of injuries. They've missed Sanchez already for a chunk of time. Haven't had Chapman for a chunk of time. They've got CeCe on the DL. Now they have Aaron Hicks on the DL. Castro's on the DL. So they've been hit, as all teams are, with the injury bug. They just got Ellsbury back a few days ago. So and obviously his struggles, quote unquote, have been well documented. But I think that it is sustainable in a way, and the same way that other young teams. I talked about it last night on a radio interview with the Minnesota Twins. Like, sometimes being young and dumb is good. Because
it is.
you don't know how good or bad you're supposed to be. You just go out there and you just play, and you try to block out all the dopes talking about how good or bad you're supposed to be, and you just go out there and play and let it hang. And they're getting good stuff from Severino. They spoiled a great start from him last night, and that'll be something to watch, how they kind of pace his innings and the jumps in his innings. But Jordan Montgomery's been really good for this team. Masahiro Tanaka, his last start against Darvish was great. So there's signs of hope, and hopefully for them, if this bullpen can kind of sort itself out. I still think, like I said before, it's still one of the best bullpens in baseball on paper, and now it's just a matter of getting everybody back on track. You get that going, you keep the pitching rolling. I think that this offense is still pretty stacked once they're all healthy and hitting and banging on all cylinders.
I would agree with you. Last one before I let you get out here and close it out. When you look at the trade deadline, which is right around the corner, it just seems as though if you go by what's transpired the last several years with Kansas City and the Chicago Cubs, when they reinforced their rosters with big-time transactions before the non-waiver trade deadline, you look at some of these teams that are contending, it seems to me like no hot prospect is really safe out there, and some of these teams, contenders, that are going to be looking to try to get them over the hump. You look at last year, when you look at some of these minor leaguers, whether it was Frazier or Espinoza or Torres, I mean, a lot of these kids were moved. Do you foresee that again this year with some of those teams out there that are, we talked about the sustainability, or like Houston or like Washington, trying to make that next big move before the trade deadline?
I think that it's probably on a case-by-case basis. I think that the Yankees, for example, a team that's been so famous for, in years past, kind of trading the farm, quite literally, for that rental player. I think for the Yankees, I think that those days are done. I asked Dan O'Dowd, our resident GM here at the network, a few weeks back. I said, are those days over? And he said, yeah. So if the Yankees are going to do that, I don't even want to throw out a name, the heck with that, but if they trade a big-time prospect, they won't do it for a rental player. They would do it for a controllable player. And I think that it's all going to depend. Now, there might be teams, as you mentioned, that are trying to get over the hump, that may do something like that may get creative in trading a big-time prospect. But, the rental, quote-unquote, pitchers that are out there are not either performing to the top of their abilities right now to garner, that big time prospect. And then those guys who are controllable, that's when it may get into a top prospect in exchange for X pitcher to help down the stretch. But I think that generally speaking, it's probably on a case by case basis and the teams that are involved.
All right, I know I got to let you get out of here. You got to prep. You got your show coming up at 2, the rundown again on MLB Network. Of course, Paul, MLB Network studio host. You can catch MLB Network tonight. You got the Rocks and the Giants at 3:30, Rangers and the Indians, I should say, later on this evening at 7 p.m. But again, you can catch Paul on the rundown coming up at 2 today on the MLB Network. Appreciate a couple moments, my friend. Hopefully we'll talk again throughout the summer.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
You got it, Paul. Take care of yourself.